What's Mrs. Claus's first name? Who is Mrs. Claus? There's an abundance of myths about Santa Claus, but how much do we really know about his wife? Is she as magical as he is? Come with me to the North Pole to learn all about Mrs. Claus. But first, leave a like and a sub for Santa so he will bring you gifts on Christmas. He prefers them to milk and cookies now. I'm finally doing my Mrs. Claus video. This was supposed to have come out last year, but I had a really bad case of the flu and was unable to make and release the video. But it will be worth the wait, I promise. Because despite me dismissing Mrs. Claus's mythic origins in my Santa Claus video, it turns out that there is a lot of cool stuff to cover. Now, despite being married to one of the most famous men in the world, Mrs. Claus doesn't do much or feature heavily in most stories. But her husband's mythic ancestors have connections to many female figures, and Santa has borrowed traits from many female characters, so we're going to dive into all these magical women. So a quick recap about Old St. Nick. Our modern conception of Santa Claus is a combination of St. Nicholas of Myra and a variety of pre-Christian figures. I did an entire video on this. It's one of my earliest videos, but unlike some of my other old videos, this one still holds up, I think. It's linked in the description, so if you want to learn more about Kris Kringle, go check out that video. Back to Mrs. Claus, though. If Santa is a combo of St. Nicholas and multiple pagan characters, then is Mrs. Claus the same? Not exactly. Unlike Santa, who has a connection to a historical figure, Santa's wife has no historical basis. This is because there is no evidence that St. Nicholas had a wife. Furthermore, there is a high chance that he was celibate. He lived in Turkey from 270 to 343. In 314 in Turkey, deacons and priests were ordered to be celibate. It wouldn't be until 1139 that this became law in all of Christendom, but given that there are 0 stories about a Mrs. St. Nicholas and that 314 law, I'm going to assume St. Nick never married. So if St. Nicholas didn't have a wife, where did Mrs. Claus come from? Well, in the 1800s, when the modern Santa began to coalesce, we get our first mentions of the woman we would recognize as Santa's wife. Mrs. Claus first appears in the 1849 story A Christmas Legend by American missionary James Rees. In the story, old Santa Claus and his wife appear at a family's home disguised as a poor, elderly couple. Although the family is poor, they let the couple spend the night. Early in the morning, their young daughter goes into the living room and sees an abundance of gifts. Fairies dance around the room. The old couple are described as having changed and now have sparkling eyes. The excited girl goes to get her parents. Then they discover that their rent has been paid, coffee and cake made, and their estranged daughter and her husband have returned. The story is so fascinating because it explicitly connects Santa to fairies. Mrs. Claus also leaves the North Pole with Santa and seems to be equally involved in the gift-giving and general Christmas magic. In some ways, this story is more modern feeling than many actual modern depictions of Mrs. Claus. 2 years later, in the Yale Literary Magazine, a story mentioned that Santa must dress so fantastic because Mrs. Claus helped him. After this, Mrs. Claus begins to appear in many Christmas stories, where she is usually depicted as helping Santa with his duties. But for the most part, these stories have little to do with mythology. Interestingly, she's never given a consistent first name, a trend that continues to this day. 1970's Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where Santa's wife is named Jessica, seems to be the first time anyone gave Mrs. Claus a first name. That name would continue to be popular, but other names pop up from time to time, including Anya, Margaret, and Carol. But as I've said, these tales are not very connected to mythology. And initially, I thought that's all there was to Mrs. Claus. She was invented in the 1800s to give Santa a wife. But it's not that simple. While Mrs. Claus doesn't have a lot of links to older mythology, Santa takes a lot of influence from a number of female mythological beings. So that's what we're going to look into now. I touched on this in my original Santa video, but in addition to the many male winter gift givers that influenced the myth of Santa, a number of female characters played a major role in Santa's development as well. It's also important to note that in some cultures, instead of Santa, it is a female gift giver who traditionally gives gifts. But as cool as these characters like La Befana are, they rarely have an influence on Mrs. Claus. We'll start with one of the oldest and the closest religiously and geographically to St. Nicholas, La Befana. She comes from Italy, where she replaces Santa as the winter gift giver. Her name probably derives from the word Epiphania, meaning epiphany. In one origin story, when the Magi were traveling to see the baby Jesus, they stop at the woman who would become La Befana's house. They invite her to come with them to see Jesus, but she refuses. Because of this, she continues to wander the earth, leaving children gifts, hoping to find baby Jesus. La Befana is typically depicted as a witch and rides on a broom. She developed parallel to Santa, and like him gives children gifts in the winter, is specifically tied to Christmas, and has magical qualities like Santa. She is also old, and she gives coal or garlic to naughty children. It's unclear how much of this is a coincidence or how much La Befana influenced the development of Santa or vice versa. She is also similar to Mrs. Claus in some ways. They're both kindly old women connected to winter gift giving. It'd be cool to see elements of La Befana incorporated in more modern depictions of Mrs. Claus. La Befana did appear in the Santa Clauses series, where she befriends the Clauses and trains Santa's daughter in witchcraft, and in the Christmas Chronicles, Mrs. Claus does magic and makes magic herbal remedies. She's never called a witch, but she's basically a witch. Alternatively, La Befana may have come from the Roman goddess Strinia. During the Roman New Year's, people exchanged gifts called strinae in honor of the goddess. Strinia was the goddess of the new year and health and was associated with groves and sacred branches. In this theory, Strinia transformed into La Befana as Rome Christianized. Aside from the connection to La Befana, though, Strinia has few connections to Kris Kringle. But there are more goddesses and magical women to explore. Another one of the oldest goddesses that may have played a role in Santa's development is the Sami goddess Asesiatni. Unfortunately, I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce her name, which really sucks because I think she's very cool. The Sami languages are endangered, and there have been periods when the Sami people weren't allowed to speak their languages, so there aren't a lot of sources to help with pronunciation. Super brief recap. Sami shamanism probably influenced Santa. The Sami live near the North Pole, reindeer are an integral part of their lives and traditional religion. Their shamans dressed in red and delivered hallucinogenic mushrooms to the people during the winter in the olden days. I go into more detail into this theory in my Santa video. One thing I did not mention in that video because I didn't know it at the time was that other Arctic indigenous groups have similar traditions, and some have long traditions of female shamans. On screen is a Tungus Siberian shaman. Note the red and white clothing. So this goddess may also play a role in the creation of Santa. Now it is very hard to research Sami religion. The Sami still face a lot of systemic oppression, and there unfortunately isn't a lot of easily accessible information about their myths, at least in English. But as best as I can tell, Asesiatni was one of the oldest goddesses. She was the ruler of the cold seasons and is associated with the night, darkness, and reindeer. She was married to either the cosmic bear or the moon and was the ancestress of the bear clan. So like Santa, she has reindeer, winter, and night associations. Reindeer are very sacred to the Sami, and those hallucinogenic mushrooms I mentioned earlier, the reindeer actually eat them first, and then the shamans drink the reindeer's urine to get the high. Because of the deep importance of reindeer in Sami religion, I think it's reasonable to assume that Asesiatni is a very important goddess, so her influence on shamanism, and by extension on Santa, seems very clear. Deer goddesses are among the oldest goddesses in the world, and they are strongly linked to shamanism. The Bad Durenberg shaman, for instance, was buried with the split bone of a deer, believed to be used to apply red paint, which is still faintly visible on it today, and her headdress had horns that likely came from a roe buck. On screen is a reconstruction of the shaman in her full regalia. As an aside, the Bad Durenberg shaman is one of my favorite grave good discoveries, up there with the Amesbury archer buried by Stonehenge. I have fallen down a massive rabbit hole. Deer goddesses could be a video all their own, but I'm going to try to stay focused on Santa and Mrs. Claus. The Lithuanian and Latvian solar goddess Sale, in some accounts, flew across the sky in a sleigh pulled by antlered reindeer and dropped pebbles of amber representing the sun down chimneys. Frankly, there are a lot more deer and deer-associated goddesses, but I'm not going to cover them all here. Just know that the association between women and deer is strong. Yes, there are a few antlered gods like Cernunnos, but mostly it's just deer goddesses. It's also important to note that male reindeer shed their antlers in the winter, while the does keep their antlers, meaning that technically Santa's reindeer should be female. This is something that Santa's ancient predecessors and the humans who believed in them would have known very well. We don't see unrealistic male antlered reindeer with Santa until the 1800s in America, written by people who likely had very little knowledge of actual reindeer. I also have to mention that deer are sometimes considered the cattle of the fairies, so we see again a connection between Santa and fairies. As I've said before, he and Mrs. Claus are fae creatures. But wait, there's more. So now let's talk about Yulamori and Yulapucky. I really wanted to find a cool picture of Yulamori as a goat woman, like you can find of her husband Yulapucky. Unfortunately, it seems like no one has drawn such a picture. So who are Yulamori and Yulapucky? They come from Finland, where they are now essentially just the Finnish version of Santa and Mrs. Claus, but their origins are far older. Their names mean Yule Mother and Yule Goat. Now Yule is a pre-Christian winter holiday from Germanic/Nordic mythology, so these characters were originally a part of this holiday in some way. Goats are heavily associated with Yulamori, Yulapucky, and Yule in general. This is relevant because while goats are not deer, both animals have hooked feet and pointy head growths, antlers for deer and horns for goats. This goat association likely comes from Thor. More on him later.
Oh, dog, look at that! Those things are beautiful!
Yulapucky drives a sleigh pulled by reindeer, who don't fly, and he delivers gifts. It's possible his sleigh was originally pulled by goats, but I couldn't find any proof of that. He dresses in red, but I don't know if that influence comes from modern Santa or if he always wore red. He gives good children gifts. He and his wife live in Finland's northernmost region, which is also the homeland of the Sami. This again shows the connection between Santa and the Sami. I should also mention that the Sami have intersected with Nordic culture for thousands of years. They appear in some of the Norse sagas. So the Sami influence on Santa and other figures like Joulupukki isn't just idle conjecture. These cultures were in contact with each other. However, information on Joulupukki's wife Joulumori is scarce, and she seems to be a lot like modern-day Mrs. Claus. I bring her up here because of her Sami connection, red clothing, goat and reindeer associations, which make her strikingly similar to Mrs. Claus and could likely be linked to older figures like the Sami goddess Asesiatni. And there are more interesting connections, which we will explore in just a minute. The more I research, the more I feel like we've been robbed of reindeer witch Mrs. Claus. It honestly makes me think of one of my favorite Fortnite Christmas skins, Reyna, a one-eyed reindeer warrior who calls to mind both winter reindeer goddesses and the one-eyed god Odin. And if you think that's crazy, wait till you hear about Perchta. Perchta, the Alpine Christmas witch, is a truly fascinating figure. Originally a powerful pagan goddess, she eventually transformed into a kind of female Krampus. During the 12 nights of Christmas, she flies around on a broom, like La Befana, and is accompanied by a horde of screeching demons. She punishes people whose homes aren't tidy. Remember Snowball Perchton from my Halloween special? Yeah, she's a variant of Perchta. She's also left food and drink offerings, just like Santa. Some sources even give her her own Christmas elves, tiny fairies called Heimchen. In this 1863 image, Perchta is shown as a queen and the Heimchen as small children. Like many powerful witch goddesses, Perchta has many forms, both ugly and beautiful. And like the deer and goat women we've previously mentioned, Perchta often has goat horns. Interestingly, she also sometimes has a goose foot and other bird traits. That's not really relevant here for the purposes of this video though. My point in including Perchta in this video is to showcase another goat/deer winter goddess. Also, Martin Luther condemned Perchta veneration, and as a Lutheran, I just had to bring it up. I was not expecting Luther to pop up in my research. There are 3 more goddesses that I want to discuss before I wrap this video up: Gabiah, Sif, and Frigg. I touched on Gabiah in my Kris Kringle video because of her similarities to Santa. My main purpose there was in pointing out Santa's fairy traits, which he shares with figures like Gabiah. She is a Baltic hearth spirit who protects the hearth and is given food and drink offerings, much like Santa. It's also interesting to note that Santa takes on association that is so often connected to women and goddesses, the hearth. In many ways, he's taken on a lot of traits not just associated with fairies, but with goddesses as well, which is made all the more interesting by the fact that his wife plays such a minor role in his mythology. But of course, gods like Thor and Odin are also a part of Santa's history, and both of them have wives. Did they have any similarities to Mrs. Claus? So Thor's connection to Santa primarily comes from his goats, who pull his chariot, and the goats' connection to the winter holiday of Yule. And if you thought that connection was tenuous, his wife's connection to Mrs. Claus is even more tenuous. Sif is a fertility goddess associated with the harvest and marriage. Her biggest similarity to Mrs. Claus is that, like Mrs. Claus, we know very little about her outside of her marriage to the much more famous Thor. Odin's wife is a little more complicated. Odin has multiple paramours throughout the myths, but most sources agree that his wife was Frigg. She is powerful in Sather, Norse magic, so witchy Mrs. Claus energy is back. The most important myth she is associated with, and the one you might be familiar with, is the death of Bolger. This is because Bolger is her son, and if you're familiar with that myth, you probably know that it has nothing to do with Mrs. Claus, except for one weird and probably coincidental detail. Bolger was killed with a sharpened twig of mistletoe, a plant now associated with Christmas. Santa owes a lot to powerful myths of magical women, to the point that he would likely look quite different today if you removed all of the traits he received from these goddesses. And Mrs. Claus could stand to be a lot more interesting than she usually is, and it would be cool to see her reimagined as a more powerful magical figure in her own right. Imagine if Mrs. Claus was depicted as a powerful reindeer shaman. I might have discovered the topic for my video next December. Maybe I'll reimagine Santa and Mrs. Claus as powerful reindeer shamans. Until next time, Merry Christmas, and watch out for those dark winter fairies. And clean your house, or the Perchta will slit your stomach.